Ever get that feeling where you're trying to wrap your head around a story and it just won't click? All the pieces are there, but it just feels murky.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially the news these days. It can be a lot.
Yeah. Well, today we're tackling one of those stories, trying to bring it into focus. It's the case of Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish PhD student at Tufts who was recently detained. It's gotten a lot of attention, a lot of questions.
Absolutely. It's complex, for sure, and concerning on multiple levels.
Right. So to get a grip on this whole thing, we've been digging deep into a really in-depth article from CNN. They've laid out a lot of the details, the timeline, what we know so far.
Yeah, that CNN piece is a good starting point, for sure. Lots to unpack there.
Totally. And that's what we're here to do. We want to make sense of this for you. Break down the main events, the key players, and really sort through the different perspectives and arguments.
Right. Cutting through the noise, getting to the core of what matters.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. Where and when did this all happen?
Okay, so according to the CNN article, Rumeysa Öztürk was arrested on a Tuesday evening in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Somerville.
Yep, right near the Tufts campus where she's studying.
So this was practically on her home turf, right?
Right. And get this, she was on her way to an iftar dinner, the meal to break the fast during Ramadan.
Oh, wow. So not exactly a scenario where you'd expect something like this to go down.
Totally. And the way the arrest happened is raising even more eyebrows. Her attorney, Masakambabai, told CNN that Öztürk was just walking alone near her apartment when she was approached by 6 people, but they weren't in uniform.
Plain clothes.
Yeah. And there's surveillance video that seems to back this up.
So what happened next?
Well, here's the thing. It seems that these plainclothes individuals, none of them showed any ID or badges until after they'd already stopped her physically.
Wait, hold up. They restrained her before identifying themselves as law enforcement.
That's what the article is suggesting, yeah. And apparently in the video, you can see one of them finally flashing a badge, like it was hidden or something. Then another one takes her phone.
Wow. Talk about unsettling. I mean, I'd be terrified if that happened to me.
Absolutely. And the video, it gets even weirder because then after they've got her and they've taken her phone, they start putting on cloth coverings over their faces, some of them even wearing sunglasses.
Like masks.
Yeah, like masks. And you can hear someone, probably a bystander who was there, asking them, "Why are you hiding your faces? You don't look like it," like questioning if they were even legit.
I mean, that's a fair question, right? If you're being approached by people who are covering their faces and not identifying themselves properly, I'd be suspicious too.
No doubt. And this whole encounter, from them approaching her to putting her in an SUV and driving off, it all went down in about a minute, according to the article.
So incredibly fast.
Super quick. And from there, things get even more complicated. Öztürk was taken from Somerville, Massachusetts, straight to an ICE facility.
ICE. Like Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yep, but not just any ICE facility. They took her all the way to Louisiana.
Louisiana, why so far away?
That's one of the big questions. And the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has confirmed that she is being held at this facility in Louisiana. But here's the kicker. No criminal charges have been filed against her.
So they're detaining her without any charges.
That's what it looks like right now. And to make things even more complex, the president of Tufts University, Sunil Kumar, has confirmed that Öztürk's visa status has been terminated.
Wait, so not only is she detained, but now she's lost her legal status to be in the country.
That's right. But thankfully, there's been some pushback. A federal judge in Boston, Denise Casper, has temporarily blocked her deportation.
Oh, good. So at least there's a chance to figure this out.
Exactly. According to the CNN article, Judge Casper wants to figure out if a Boston court even has the authority to deal with this case, since Öztürk is now all the way down in Louisiana.
Makes sense. It's a jurisdictional thing, right? Different states, different courts, different rules.
Exactly. And this whole situation is really similar to another case that CNN mentions, the case of Mahmoud Khalil.
Remind me, who's that?
Mahmoud Khalil was a Palestinian activist, graduated from Columbia University. He was also detained and sent to Louisiana. And in his case, a New York judge also stepped in to pause his deportation while they sorted out the jurisdiction issue.
So we've got 2 cases, both individuals arrested near their homes, both moved across the country to Louisiana, and both facing legal challenges to their detention. It definitely seems like there's a pattern here.
Right. And it makes you wonder, why Louisiana? Why the rush to move them so far away? What's going on here?
Exactly. So what's the official reason for detaining Öztürk in the first place? What's the government saying?
Well, a DHS spokesperson told CNN that Öztürk engaged in activities in support of Hamas. But, and this is important, they didn't give any specific details about what those activities were.
Activities in support of Hamas. That's a pretty serious accusation to just throw out there without any specifics.
Right. And then you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who weighed in on the situation as well. He claimed that he had determined that Ozturk's alleged activities were a risk to U.S. foreign policy interests.
Again, no specifics.
Nope, none whatsoever. It's all very vague.
No.
He also suggested, and this is where it gets tricky, that maybe Ozturk was involved in some kind of disruptive student protests about Israel.
Protests, like on campus?
Yeah, potentially. But he didn't provide any evidence to back that up. He just sort of threw it out there. You know, he talked about how the Trump administration had revoked hundreds of visas for similar reasons, but didn't explicitly link that to Ozturk's case. It's all very speculative.
So we've got these serious allegations being made, support for Hamas, risk to foreign policy, and then these hints about disruptive protests. But it's all very much up in the air, no concrete detail.
It's a lot of smoke, not a lot of fire, at least not publicly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. What do we know about Rumeisa Ozturk herself?
Well, from what CNN reports, she's a PhD student in psychology at Tufts. She's been in the U.S. since 2018, studying on a F1 student visa.
So she's been here legally for a while?
Yeah, and she came on a Fulbright scholarship, no less. She's got a master's degree from Columbia University. She's clearly a serious student.
And she was pretty close to finishing her PhD, right?
Yeah, about 10 months away from completing her dissertation, according to the article.
It's crazy to think that all this is happening right as she's about to reach this huge milestone in her academic career.
It's wild. And it's important to mention that Ozturk has spoken out publicly before. There's an op-ed she co-wrote for the Tufts student newspaper back in March.
What was that about?
It was critical of Tufts' response to calls for divestment from companies linked to Israel. And they didn't hold back. They used some pretty strong language, talking about accusations of deliberate starvation and indiscriminate slaughter of Palestinians.
Okay, so she's clearly not afraid to express her views, even if they're controversial.
Right. And her brother, Asim Ozturk, has spoken out too. He thinks she's being targeted for her beliefs, for her support for Palestine. He called it a witch hunt.
Wow. So how has Tufts reacted to all of this? I mean, one of their students is being detained, accused of serious things.
Well, Tufts officials have said that they had no idea this arrest was going to happen. They were completely blindsided. President Kumar even called the video of the arrest disturbing. He's especially concerned about international students feeling unsafe after this.
Understandably so.
Tufts is saying they're providing support to students like counseling and legal help, and they're reaching out to government officials, trying to ensure Ozturk gets due process.
So they're not just sitting back and letting this happen?
No, not at all. And there have been protests on campus, too. Hundreds of people showing up. They're worried about students being silenced for expressing their opinions.
Yeah, it does raise concerns about free speech on campus. And what about Turkey? I mean, Ozturk is a Turkish citizen. Surely they're involved somehow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Turkish government is keeping tabs on the situation. They're in touch with Ozturk's family. And the Turkish embassy has reached out to the U.S. State Department, ICE, everybody, to make sure Ozturk's rights as a Turkish citizen are being protected.
So Turkey's actively engaged.
Definitely. But on the other hand, the U.S. State Department is being super tight-lipped about it all. They won't comment on the specifics, citing privacy concerns and all that.
So lots of questions, not a lot of answers from the U.S. side.
Right. And that arrest video, we keep coming back to it because it really is the starting point of all this. It's just so strange.
Yeah, the plainclothes officers, the concealed badges, the masks, it's all very cloak and dagger.
Totally. And to add to that, CNN pointed out that there was another arrest recently, a guy named Badar Khan Suri, a fellow at Georgetown University.
What happened with him?
Well, his attorney said that the officers who arrested him had their guns out and were also wearing masks. It kind of makes you wonder if this is becoming a standard tactic.
It's unsettling, to say the least. So after this dramatic arrest, what happened to Ozturk?
Okay, so buckle up, because this is where it gets even more complicated. After her arrest in Somerville, she was apparently taken to a bunch of different government offices in New England. Then, early the next morning, they flew her all the way to Louisiana.
Seriously, Louisiana. What's with Louisiana?
Nah, we don't know. But it's important to note that throughout this whole process, Ozturk wasn't told what she was being charged with, and she wasn't allowed to talk to a lawyer.
That's so messed up.
Right. Her attorney did file an emergency petition in Boston to try and stop her from being moved out of state, and a judge did issue an order saying the government had to give them notice before transferring her.
So Did they give notice?
Nope. According to a government lawyer, they'd already moved her to Louisiana by the time the judge's order came through. And now she's scheduled for a removal hearing down in Louisiana on April 7th.
So basically, they just ignored the court order.
Pretty much. Ostrich's lawyers are fighting back, though. They've asked the court in Massachusetts to take control of the case and release her on bail. And they're also trying to get her F1 student visa reinstated, because apparently it was revoked on March 21st, but she wasn't told until after she was already arrested.
So they just yanked her visa without even telling her.
It seems that way. And the details of her transfer to Louisiana are pretty disturbing, too. First, they took her to a facility in Alexandria, then moved her again to the South Louisiana IC Processing Center in Basel. Her lawyers are saying that during this whole transfer process, she didn't have access to her medications, she couldn't talk to her lawyer, and a Turkish consulate representative was even denied information about where she was.
Wow. Talk about a nightmare scenario.
Totally. Her friends couldn't find her for almost 24 hours. They were freaking out, thinking she might have had a medical emergency.
And did she?
She did. She had an asthma attack while she was being transported. And her lawyers are saying that ICE didn't tell them, the court, or anyone at the Department of Justice about the transfer, even though they were supposed to.
So much for following the rules.
Right. And it was only through those online detainee locators that anyone was able to figure out where she was.
Those things are so depressing.
I know, right? It's like a reminder that these are real people, not just numbers on a website. And Ostrich's case isn't unique, unfortunately. She's actually the third international student we know of who's been transferred to Louisiana after being detained like this. Remember Mahmoud Khalil?
Yeah. And there was that other guy from Georgetown, right?
Exactly. Badar Khan Suri. It's a pattern that's starting to emerge. And Ostrich's attorney summed it up pretty well in the CNN article. She basically said that the government keeps making these big accusations like supporting terrorism, but they don't offer any real evidence. It's all just smoke and mirrors.
So where does this leave us?
Well, we've got a Tufts PhD student, Rumaisa Ostrich, detained by the government, accused of serious things, but with no real evidence presented publicly. She's been moved across the country, her visa has been revoked, and her basic rights seem to have been violated at every turn.
In this whole case raises some huge questions about the balance between national security and individual rights, about freedom of speech, or about how international students are treated in this country.
Yeah, it's a mess, and it's a reminder that these things can happen to anyone, especially if you dare to speak out against the status quo.
So after hearing all this, after diving deep into this really complex and frankly disturbing situation, we're left with a question for you, our listeners. What do you think this case says about the state of our country? About the way we treat people who come here to study, to learn, to contribute to our society? What does it say about our commitment to due process, to fairness, to basic human rights? It's a lot to think about.
It really is, and it's a conversation we all need to be having.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's heavy stuff, but we hope it's helped to shed some light on this really important and developing story.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.